Welcome, everyone. We're glad to have our micro congregation with us today and grateful for all of you who are joining us online. We've had some real sobering news within our community that one of our regular musicians and speakers is now COVID positive, as is his 31-year-old athletic girlfriend, who described COVID-19 to me as having the worst flu you could possibly imagine, and then being backed over by a pickup truck. So I just want to remind everyone that this virus is highly contagious, and the only way that we have to prevent its spread is behaviors, which means, even here in the sanctuary, ladies and gentlemen, if you're not eating or drinking, you should have your mask on. And scientists have recently discovered that your nose is attached to your lungs. And so wearing a mask beneath your nose does exactly no good at all. So please be aware that COVID-19 has killed over 170,000 people that the government is admitting to right now, more likely more than 500,000. So if you think it can't affect you, you are wrong. And we all need to be as careful as we can possibly be. For those of you that are not here in Springfield, you may not know that we have sold our church building. We plan to vacate the premises in mid-October, but we have already been offered recording space in other places. So there should be no interruption to our services. And I will be emailing out a new mailing address. We're taking out a post office box during our transient days when we may be recording in one place for a while and then appearing in another place for a while. So for your donations, I will give you a post office box where you can send them. And do please send them, because our costs are still considerable even at this time. If you will now join me in a meditation. We confess that we have often confused nationalism with patriotism. We have used the threat of violence as a substitute for peace. We have written laws to protect the powerful from the weak and rob the poor to make the rich more wealthy. We are not good at governing ourselves in the ways of justice. Let us challenge one another that we may not despair, but that we may rise up to try again to make justice visible on earth.
This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the Texas border, through the Juarez Mountains, with the migrant caravans. This land was made for you and me. This land is your land, this land is my land, from the piers of Charleston to the fields of cotton, from the crowded prisons to the streets of this land was made for you and me. This land is your land, this land is my land, from the Jamestown landing to Lakota Badlands, from the Trail of Tears to
Today's wisdom lesson is from Coco Cantors. There's an overabundance of research in the social sciences and humanities that substantiates the claim that our current political economic world order is structurally unsustainable. The manifesto is important because it pulls this massive repository of knowledge in a call to action. The policies and strategies used before COVID-19 are inadequate to address the challenges of an increasingly fragile global system. From my research on alternative finance and urban economies, I know that concerted institutional effort is vital in achieving structural change on a broad scale. I hope the manifesto activates policymakers and institutions to collaborate in sustainably rebuilding society.
There's something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there telling me I've got to beware. I think it's time to stop. What's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.
Battle lines being drawn. Nobody's right if everybody's wrong. Young people speak their minds, getting so much resistance from behind. It's time to stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going on.
What a field day for the heat. 1,000 people in the street, singing songs and carrying signs, mostly say hooray for our side. It's time to stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.
Paranoia strikes deep into your life, it will creep. It starts when you're always afraid. Step out of line
And home,
and take you away. Stop, hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Stop, hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Stop, hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Stop, children, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.
Well, folks, it seems like it's time for some brutal honesty about this pandemic. We've spent the last 6 months negotiating with ourselves about when is life going to return to normal? When can kids go back to school safely? When can churches again try to fill pews with throngs of congregants? When can we do something as basic as going to a movie or a concert, or confidently plan a vacation that involves air travel without updating our wills before we get on the plane? When we felt like we had to stop having Sunday morning services back here in March, we assumed that we would be unlocking the doors and inviting people back in by the 1st of May, at least by June at the latest. There was a vain hope that warmer spring weather would kill off COVID-19 as it usually does the annual flu. Sadly, it appears that this novel virus enjoys hot, sunny weather as much as any college student on spring break. Rather than going dormant, infection rates have just moved around the United States, spiking in different places. The adamant states that are forcing schools and universities to reopen will, quite stupidly, spark a rise in infections that will almost certainly kill tens of thousands of people, if not, in fact, hundreds of thousands of people. Like many of you, I have places that I want to go. I have people that I want to see. I've had to cancel 5 of my out-of-state speaking engagements, and I don't mind telling you that my scuba gear is dry rotting in a closet. Months ago, I had some confidence in the coming iterations of a vaccine, but more sober-minded virologists have been asking us to temper our expectations. The first vaccines may provide only very limited protection from infection. The painfully honest answer to the question we've all been asking, when will we go back to normal? The answer may be a year or 2, but folks, it may also be never. We may simply have to rethink what normal is. I don't know if our local opera or symphony will survive this shutdown, and frankly, I don't know that the symphony and opera will survive in Kansas City or St. Louis. And Sean and I were talking earlier this week, we're not sure about Chicago and New York. I have no idea if the cruise lines will ever return. A few ships have tried to make a break and start out again, and they immediately found COVID on board their ships in the first days that they were at sea. In the new normal, people may not ever get to go back to seated churches, sit on pews, hip to hip with strangers, sitting only dozens of feet from large choirs. And professional athletes. I've been missing a lot of, what's the season now? Something. I've been missing a lot of sports, but it may be that all professional sports may become pay-per-view only TV events. We're probably all fairly well glued to the news these days, none of you as much as I am, I'm sure. We're trying to figure out and predict how much normal we might get back to. And I hate saying this, but given the current political environment, we can't really put any confidence in any information we're being given. Now that COVID information is being run through the White House, you can be guaranteed that 100% of what comes out of the White House is a lie. And because of that, you can't really trust what you get from the WHO or even from the CDC, because everyone is cooking the books to make COVID-19 seem to be less lethal than it really is. I hope this is going to change when we get a new administration in the White House in January, but even though we're being told that there have been more than 170,000 COVID-related deaths in the United States, and that is a nightmare scenario on its own, but that number is the result of calling most COVID deaths something else most of the time. We're not just undercounting COVID deaths, we are hiding the majority of them. Florida and Texas are great examples. For the past several years, those two states have experienced in the first 4 months of the year less than 1,000 deaths per month from pneumonia. But this year, they are reporting over 4,000 deaths a month in the first months of the year from pneumonia. Now, Mark Twain was fond of saying, there are lies, there are damn lies, and there's statistics. I realize that people can argue about these charts and manipulate the numbers, but the sad truth is, even in America, we don't really know what the sad truth is, because all the books are being cooked. How many people have actually died from COVID-19? The reported number is certainly an undercount. That's impossible to dispute. But is it an undercount of 40%? Or is it an undercount of 400%? We don't know, because at this present moment, the government of the United States and of many of our states simply cannot be believed. That is so sad to me. For all of our lives, we have ridiculed the misinformation put out by the Soviet Union and Communist China and other third world countries, but we never imagined that America would become an empire of lies. But it has. Whatever the true number is, we can count on the death rate going up dramatically as schools reopen and as the fall flu season joins forces with the coronavirus. For historical comparison, we were engaged in World War II for 4 years, and in 4 years, just over 400,000 Americans were killed in World War II. We will pass that number in 1 year of COVID-19. This is a war, but we are not on a wartime footing. In fact, all we seem to talk about is getting back to normal and when things will be better, when in fact, folks, let's be honest, it's going to get worse before it gets better. We have a certain longing to go back to the way it was before the pandemic, but at a more crucial level, I'm going to ask you to reconsider that today, because let's tell the truth now. Normal wasn't that great, was it? And just as World War II changed the face of government and industry and the workforce and the marketplace, I believe that we need to be thinking about a new normal that must emerge from the battlefield of this mortal battle that we're engaged in with this coronavirus. Like all of you, I am hoping for a major change in our government at the end of this year. Also, like many of you, I find that the current Democratic ticket is not at all what I was hoping for. I really thought that America was ready for a true progressive at this time, but we're not getting that. Out of a field of more than 20 candidates, most of whom favored Medicare for all, for example, 80% of Democrats in America favor Medicare for all, but we chose 2 candidates to form a ticket who are in the minority who oppose Medicare for all, demonstrating, I think, beyond all refutation, that even the Democratic Party could care less what you need, that we are still dealing with 2 corporately controlled parties that would kill you as quickly as we take firewood and throw it on a fire. I don't want to step on anyone's toes, but when you look at all the people that were on the stage earlier in the primary, the only good thing I can say about Joe Biden is that he is a better choice than Marianne Williamson. I'll tell you up front, I haven't seen Oprah on a screen since I watched The Color Purple in a theater in Louisville, Kentucky in 1985. But since Oprah became famous in this movie, she has made one quack after another a national figure. Oprah has given the world so many fraudulent snake oil salesmen, Dr. Phil, Dr. Oz, Deepak Chopra, and Marianne Williamson. And so, Oprah, if you're listening, give it a rest. Your suggestions are nearly as dangerous as COVID-19. And if that offends any of our listeners, let me say I'm sorry that you didn't get to go to college. But the thing that we have reason to hope for in a new administration is that unlike the Trump administration and the administration of governors like Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis, Texas Governor Greg Abbott, and Georgia's Governor Brian Kemp, we expect a Biden administration to pay attention to medical scientists. Clearly, the reason why the pandemic has been so much more lethal in the United States than it has been elsewhere in the world is because Trump has insisted on ignoring the advice of serious doctors and scientists and instead pushing false narratives and snake oil cures. Governor DeSantis, Abbott, Kemp, along with their cult leader, to call him that, Donald Trump, have been too worried about holding on to power and about propping up the economy, but not nearly enough about saving lives. We have every good reason to believe that this insanity will at least come to a moderated end in January. Let the congregation say, amen. But just like we want scientists and doctors trying to lead the charge on the medical battle with COVID, what I want to earnestly beg of you today is that we similarly pay attention to what the experts and academics have to suggest about how the world's economy, the world's government, and our environmental management needs to recover in a post-COVID world. We need to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. We can't just be afraid of getting infected and pretend like all the problems that existed in January of 2020 are not still with us. We do need to follow sane medical advice going forward to stem the spread of COVID-19 and the inevitable pandemics that will follow. Because, folks, our planet is overcrowded and our environment is overstressed, and so there will be other pandemics. But we need to be more than simply reactive to them. We had problems before we had a pandemic, and many of those problems have only gotten worse. In January of this year, before the virus had affected us at all, our for-profit, heartless healthcare system was already failing us. Our capitalist economy that kept pushing resources up into the hands of the 1% and the 0.1% was already failing us. Our government that holds on to power through corporate donors, and let's call it what it is, through corporate bribes and corporately written legislation, was already failing us. Our symbolic gestures towards recycling, Earth Day, postage stamps, the environmental accords that were either ignored or were too little too late, were failing us. And men and women, you don't need me to tell you that churches and synagogues and mosques and holy sites that were charged with speaking truth to power, teaching morality to this generation, giving voice to the voiceless, you don't need for me to tell you that the church has failed us for 1,000 years. Don't be scared, I'm not going to hit you. I hear that. As the author Laurie Buchanan has pointedly said, whatever you are not changing, you are choosing. Maybe we don't want to pollute the earth. Maybe we don't like the way we finance elections in America. Maybe we don't want to approve of our lax gun laws, the huge wage disparity between the rich and the poor. But come on, we're not elementary school students here. We're not helpless children. If we're not actively changing this, then we are tacitly approving of it. We are tacitly choosing it. And if I may channel my inner middle school principal, stop it. As it happens, since Denmark has managed the pandemic in their nation pretty well, a group of 170 Dutch scholars from 5 different universities came together to compile a list of things that the world needs to do in the wake of the pandemic. I'm including the headline in Dutch because I find that language to be impossible to understand or read or speak. But here are the 5 things that the Dutch scholars recommended to us. For the benefit of our podcast listeners, I'm going to read what those of you here can see. Number 1, move away from development focused on an aggregate GDP. Number 2, develop an economic framework focused on redistribution. Number 3, develop a form of agriculture that is regenerative. 4, and guys, you're going to hate this one, reduce consumption and travel. And finally, number 5, debt cancellation. Please allow me to just hit on each one of these quickly. In the first one, our Western economy has been built on what Greta Thunberg calls a fantasy of endless economic growth. We cannot go on making economic expansion our goal when we know that expansion is based on using up limited resources and trying to drive our current workforce to produce more for less income every year. Folks, now that I'm within a year of my own retirement, I am painfully realizing that there is more to life than working more hours and trying to increase production. I have not taken a sick day since I was 16 years old. Looking back on the last 50 years of my life, I think I should have taken more sick days. Europeans are trying to make their work week shorter and their vacations longer, and we Americans keep trying to figure out how to lower wages and increase productivity, which simultaneously shortens our lives. The mortality rate in every nation of the world is 100%. So folks, listen to me. Get some friends. Fall in love. Engage in recreation. Do not try to get the perfect attendance gold watch at the end of your career. You have other things to do with your life besides work. Number 2, we need to develop an economic framework that distributes resources more equitably and does not constantly shove profit into the hands of the 1%. And this is as true of healthcare as it is of athletic shoes. The reason why healthcare in America sucks so much is because we have designed it to make a profit. Illness should never have been a profit motive. We should have never tried to make money on the backs of people being sick. The first question to be asked, especially in a pandemic, is how do we provide affordable health care to everyone who needs it? The system we have is based on scarcity and hoarding, and it's driving us to the bottom of the developed world's healthcare systems. We have written our copyright and our patent laws in the United States so that we can create billionaires at the top of the ladder, when what we need to be doing is spreading those resources around so that there is growth and innovation and technology among the whole population. Just look at how our school system is currently being run. As the pandemic forces schools into distance learning without providing computers and internet access to everyone, some students will do okay, while others are going to keep falling farther and farther behind. And if you think that's sad, but you're not worried about it because your kids have computers and Wi-Fi, let me tell you something. You do not want to live in a nation where half of the citizens are functionally illiterate. How do you think Trump got elected in the first place? We want everyone to be as educated as possible. The third point is about developing a regenerative agriculture. And again, capitalism has shaped agriculture over the past 2 generations so that we have virtually killed off family farms in favor of corporate farming. We grow and subsidize the food crops that can be grown in fields of thousands of acres at a time with purely mechanized farming methods. So we grow and subsidize corn, rice, potatoes, wheat, and soy, the 5 crops that we shouldn't be eating. On September 20th, I'm going to deliver a sermon on the politics of food, and I'm going to drill down into this topic deeper. But for now, let's say we are growing crops that deplete our soil and poison consumers. We need to turn that around. We need to be growing on smaller farms, green vegetables and fruits, and improve our diet. The fourth thing is to reduce consumption and travel. Our Dutch friends suggest that we really need to consider the impact of all of our travel on the environment. Cars and airplanes are the worst. I hate that because I love to travel. But to be kind to the earth, we need to reduce our carbon output. And that means we need to stop building larger closets so that we have more shoes and clothes. We need to stop covering our landscape with storage units so that we can just keep buying more and more stuff that we stuff into more and more storage spaces. We need to stop burning coal and oil and gasoline and natural gas. In this one arena, the pandemic may actually be teaching us some important lessons. Very many business meetings can be held over Zoom. Many employees can be trusted to be very productive from home. We don't have to fill up our city streets at rush hour in the morning and in the evening, and we don't always have to have in-person meetings. And it may, in fact, not be unreasonable to suggest that every single one of us plant a new tree every time we take a trip on an airplane. We have got to strive to live in a carbon-neutral way. The fifth suggestion from our Congress of Scholars is the shortest and the most complex. To say simply, debt cancellation is to give us an assignment whose application is going to be more complicated than the issue of reparations for the descendants of African slaves, but it is similar to it. Raising salaries is only one aspect of redistribution of resources, but another is the fact that capital itself is so unfairly distributed that some means of putting capital back into the hands of families is crucial to creating a fair society. Poverty is a multi-generational problem. Just one example of this is to look back at fairly recent history when Americans were making the push from the east to the west, when we had land claims made, when we opened up Oklahoma, we allowed people to just go run out and stake a claim for certain pieces of property that became capital that their family has kept for generations. But do you know who wasn't in those land rushes? Black people, Native Americans, Latinx people, Asians. It was only for white people. And so if we have created structures of multi-generational poverty, how can we be surprised that minorities in our country are still poor? We made sure they were poor. There is a very basic rule of capitalism. Most of you have probably heard it. Poor people pay rent. Rich people have rent paid to them. We need to cancel student debts. We need to find a way to subsidize home ownership that doesn't make it a lifelong journey to get out of the tenant-landlord trap. I said earlier that the church has failed us. Institutional religion has failed us in very many ways, especially in gifting us with entirely neurotic guilt for evolutionary appetites and for teaching us to focus on an unknown, unseen, and probably entirely imaginary afterlife rather than trying to clean up the mess that we live in now. But what I have specifically in mind today is that the church has taught us to be charitable when it should have been teaching us to love justice. I loved all the years that all of us here were involved in taking meals to the homeless at Bill's Place. Those days will be etched in my memory as sacred moments for the rest of my life. But every week that we went down there, I was realizing more and more powerfully that as loving and holy as charity can be, charity is not justice. As long as those homeless people continue to be dependent on the kindness of strangers to feed them, we are delaying justice. The church has failed us as long as it taught us that we were supposed to be good people in an evil society rather than working together to turn an evil society into a better world. I love the powerful reminder of Dr. Cornel West, who asks us to never forget that justice is what love looks like in public. Before we rush to go back to the normal that was unjust, let us imagine a world that doesn't institutionalize poverty, that doesn't depend on ecological destruction in order to gain profit, and doesn't use illness as an opportunity to make money. That's the way things used to be. Am I crazy? Or can we do better? Let's change rather than choosing the evils that we have grown accustomed to.
This is a song for the billionaires. You can't take it with you, brother Will, brother John. You can't take it with you, brother Will, brother John. It ain't no use, mister, after you're gone. You can't take it with you, brother Will, brother John. You needn't squeeze your coin tight in your hand. No place for small change in the promised land. It ain't no use, mister, after you're gone. You can't take it with you, brother Will, brother John. Shake a leg here, shake a leg there. Laugh a little, smile a little, spread a little cheer. Brother Will, brother John, brother Will, brother John, brother Will, brother John. Why mope around with funereal faces? Whip up your nag and loosen your traces. Take a little joy, take a little pleasure. Bow to the ladies, dance another measure. Brother Will, brother John, brother Will, brother John, brother Will, brother John. You'll have to leave when the coffin lid's on. You can't take it with you, brother Will, brother John. Brother Will, brother John, brother Will, brother John, brother Will, brother Will, brother John.
Sisters and brothers, please be safe, take care of each other, be aware of the dangers that are all around us, and try to protect your own health and care for those who are ill. When you go, go in peace to love and to serve.